A new gas furnace, installed, runs somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000 in most of the US. And once it's in, it spends the entire winter heating rooms nobody's sitting in. A hallway, a spare bedroom, the far end of a kitchen you walked through 20 minutes ago. Because that's simply how central heating works. It warms the whole volume of air in a house to one target temperature, whether one person is home or six, whether you're in the living room or the air is just sitting there in an empty office down the hall. Japan looked at that same problem generations ago and came to a completely different conclusion. Heat the person, not the building. Before we continue, let me mention one thing. Many of the Japanese methods I share in these videos have been collected into a practical guide over at the Japanese Home Manual. If you'd like to explore them in more detail, you'll find it there. That's all. Now, let's get back to today's method. The Kotatsu is about as simple as a heating device gets. A low table with an electric heating element mounted to its underside. A thick, heavy blanket draped between the tabletop and the table frame, and a second, smaller tabletop sitting on top of the blanket so it still functions as an ordinary table. You slide your legs underneath. The blanket traps the heat from the element right around you, and within a few minutes you're genuinely warm, while the rest of the room and the rest of the house stays exactly as cold as it was before you sat down. A full setup, table, heating unit, and blanket runs somewhere around $100 to $150 for a good one, landing right around our headline number of 120. Here's the honest framing this entire video is built around, because I want to say it plainly before we get any further into the comparison. A Kotatsu does not replace a furnace, and anyone telling you it does is asking you to believe something that isn't true. A furnace exists to keep an entire structure above freezing, to protect pipes, to keep every room in a house livable regardless of where anyone happens to be sitting. And in a genuinely cold climate, that job doesn't go away just because you own a heated table. What a Kotatsu actually does, and does extremely well, for a fraction of the cost, is let you stop paying to heat the 90% of your house that isn't currently being used, while still staying genuinely warm in the 10% that is. That distinction is the entire reason this comparison is worth making honestly, rather than as a gimmick. Central heating and zone heating aren't competing solutions to the same problem. They're solving two different problems that happen to both fall under the word warm, keeping a structure functional and keeping a person comfortable. And most homes in cold climates end up needing some version of both. What changes once you understand the difference is how much you actually need to lean on the expensive one. The math behind why this works is worth understanding rather than just trusting. A standard Kotatsu heating element draws somewhere between 300 and 600 watts, depending on the model and its power setting. Genuinely small compared to what it takes to heat an entire house's worth of air through a furnace and ductwork. Run at 500 watts for a typical few-hour evening of actual use. That's somewhere around 1.5 to 2 kilowatt-hours of electricity, which at a typical US residential rate lands the cost of an entire evening's warmth somewhere in the range of 20 to 30 cents. That's not a rounded-down marketing number. It's the real math behind why Japanese households have leaned on this exact device through generations of cold winters, in homes that historically had far less whole-house insulation and central heating than a typical modern American home has today. It's worth understanding why this approach took root so specifically in Japan, because it's not simply a matter of taste or tradition for its own sake. Traditional Japanese homes were built with thin walls, sliding paper doors, and deliberately generous airflow, all features that make excellent sense for surviving Japan's brutally humid, mold-prone summers, which we've covered on this channel before, but that make those same homes genuinely difficult and expensive to heat as a whole structure through winter. Rather than fighting that architecture with a much larger, more expensive whole-house heating system the way modern Western homes generally do, The practical answer that developed was to stop trying to heat the entire structure evenly at all, and instead, concentrate heat exactly where a person actually is. That's not a compromise or a workaround. It's a genuinely different, coherent answer to the same problem, optimized for a different set of constraints than the ones that shaped Western home heating. Over the rest of this video, we're going to build out the actual comparison properly, what the $120 buys, the real running costs, side by side with the furnaces, and exactly how to combine the two approaches so you're not paying to heat a house nobody's using while still staying genuinely warm wherever you actually are. It's worth naming the furnace side of this comparison honestly too, since a $4,000 number deserves the same scrutiny as the Kotatsu's $120. That figure covers the unit and installation for a mid-range gas furnace in a typical American home. Real, verifiable pricing. Not an inflated number chosen to make the comparison look more dramatic than it is. And it's not wasted money either. A furnace is doing a genuinely necessary job. Without one, in a real winter, pipes freeze and burst. A house becomes unlivable within days, and the structure itself can suffer real damage. Nothing in this video is arguing that a $4,000 furnace was a bad purchase. The argument is narrower and more useful than that. Once the furnace exists and the house is protected, how much of its expensive output are you actually using productively? And how much of it is heating air nobody's standing in? That's the question a lot of households never actually ask, because a furnace's thermostat makes the whole house feel like a single unit you either heat or don't. There's no obvious lever for heat just the room I'm in, built into how most central systems are designed to be used day to day. The Kotatsu, and the broader idea of zone heating it represents, is exactly that lever, and it's one most Western homes have simply never been offered as a serious option, despite it being one of the more effective, well-established ways to cut a heating bill without sacrificing actual comfort. There's also a comfort argument worth making before we get into the numbers, since cost isn't the only reason this approach has survived in Japan for as long as it has. Sitting under a kotatsu on a genuinely cold evening produces a specific, immediate kind of warmth that a room heated to 70 degrees by a furnace vent across the house doesn't quite match. Your legs and lower body are wrapped in trapped, actively heated air, while your upper body stays in cooler, fresher air, which a lot of people find more comfortable than being uniformly warm throughout. The same reason people gravitate to an open window even in a heated room. It's not just cheaper. For a lot of households that try it, it's also simply a more pleasant way to spend a cold evening than sitting in a room that's technically warm but doesn't feel like anything in particular. Let's build the actual system, starting with what $120 buys, piece by piece. A modern electric kotatsu has 3 components, and unlike a lot of solar or electrical builds on this channel, there's no wiring or safety-critical assembly involved. This is genuinely a plug-in and sit-down purchase. First, the table itself, with the heating unit built into the underside of the frame. These typically run $60 to $90 for a decent-sized table, roughly the footprint of a standard coffee table, with a thermostat control built into the heater, allowing you to adjust output rather than running it at a single fixed setting. Look specifically for a unit with an adjustable thermostat and, ideally, a timer function, since running the heater at a lower setting once you're already warm, or having it automatically step down after a couple of hours, meaningfully affects the running cost we'll calculate in a moment. Second, the futon, the specific heavy quilted blanket designed to drape between the tabletop and the table frame, trapping heat in the enclosed space underneath rather than letting it escape upward into the room. A proper kotatsu futon, rather than a generic blanket, is worth the extra $15 to $25 it typically costs, because it's specifically cut and weighted to seal around the table's perimeter without gaps. which directly determines how efficiently the heat actually stays trapped rather than leaking out around the edges. A gap-prone blanket substitute undermines the entire efficiency argument this device is built around. Third, a thin table topper, sitting on top of the futon so the Kotatsu still functions as an ordinary flat table for eating, working, or setting things down, typically included with most Kotatsu table sets rather than sold separately. Added up, table and heater around $75, a proper futon around $20, and incidental costs like a topper or minor assembly hardware. And you land right around $120 for a complete, ready-to-use setup, matching today's honest headline number rather than a rounded-down figure. Now for the real math, laid out the same way we lay out every cost comparison on this channel, with actual numbers you can verify against your own electricity rate, not a vague promise. A Kotatsu heating element typically operates in the 300 to 600 watt range, with most models offering at least a low and high setting, sometimes a mid-range as well. Run at a moderate 400 watts for 3 hours of actual evening use, a realistic pattern for most households, rather than running it continuously all day. That's 1.2 kilowatt hours of electricity, at a national average residential rate of roughly 16 cents per kilowatt hour. That's about 19 cents for an entire evening of genuine, sit under it and feel warm heat. Run it daily through a typical cold season, say 4 months, and you're looking at somewhere around $23 in electricity for an entire winter's worth of evening heating, genuinely close to pennies a day once you break it down to its actual per-session cost. Compare that to what it costs to heat an entire house with a furnace for the same period. This is genuinely harder to pin to one honest number, because it depends heavily on your specific climate, your home's size and insulation, and your fuel type. Natural gas, propane, or electric resistance heating all carry meaningfully different costs per unit of heat delivered. For a typical American home using natural gas in a moderately cold climate, monthly heating costs through the coldest months commonly run somewhere between $80 and $200, and colder climates or larger, less insulated homes push well past that range. Over the same 4-month season, that lands a typical household somewhere between $320 and $800 in furnace-driven heating costs, a number worth verifying against your own actual utility bills from last winter rather than assuming, since the range genuinely is that wide depending on where you live. Here's where the honest comparison actually lands, and it's more useful than either number in isolation. The Kotatsu isn't competing with that $300 to $800 furnace cost for the same job, because it's not doing the same job. What it genuinely does is let you turn your thermostat down several degrees during the hours you're mostly sitting in one spot, reading, working, watching something, without sacrificing your own actual comfort, since the Kotatsu is doing the direct, immediate warming work your body actually needs, while the furnace maintains a lower, cheaper background temperature for the rest of the house. The U.S. Department of Energy's own guidance on thermostat setbacks estimates that turning a thermostat back roughly 7 to 10 degrees for 8 hours a day can save in the range of 10% on a typical heating bill. A real, government-cited figure, not something invented for this video. And a Kotatsu is exactly the kind of tool that makes a meaningful setback during your actual waking, sitting still hours genuinely comfortable, rather than something you grit your teeth through. Run that 10% estimate against the $80 to $200 a month range above, and a household saving even a conservative 10 to 15% on its furnace-driven heating costs through a 4-month season is looking at savings somewhere in the range of $30 to $120 over that season, which, set against the Kotatsu's roughly $23 in its own running cost and its one-time $120 purchase price, means the device can realistically pay for itself within a single winter for a lot of households, while also being the more comfortable way to spend an evening in the first place. it's worth being precise about one more detail before moving on, because it's the kind of thing that trips up a comparison like this if left vague. A Kotatsu's heating element, being a resistive electric heater, is essentially 100% efficient at converting the electricity it draws into heat, the same way any space heater is. The genuine efficiency gain here isn't from some clever heating technology. It's entirely from the targeting. You're not making the watts themselves more efficient. You're making sure every one of them lands directly on the person who's actually cold, instead of a large share of a furnace's output drifting into rooms nobody's occupying. In the final part, we'll cover exactly how to combine both systems in a real household, the specific thermostat and Kotatsu routine that captures most of the savings without sacrificing the parts of whole house heating you genuinely can't skip, and the honest limits of where zone heating stops being enough on its own. Let's put together the actual routine, because a Kotatsu sitting in the corner unused saves you nothing, the same way a smoke detector with dead batteries protects nobody. The core habit is straightforward. On a genuinely cold evening, turn your central thermostat down several degrees below what you'd normally set it to, then sit under the Kotatsu for the hours you're actually stationary, reading, working from a laptop, watching something, eating a meal at the table itself, since a Kotatsu functions as a genuine dining or coffee table the rest of the time, not just a heating device you sit at specifically to be warm. The furnace keeps the rest of the house at a safe, functional background temperature, protecting pipes and keeping other rooms usable, while the Kotatsu handles the actual, immediate comfort job for wherever you're sitting. When you get up and move to another room, you're back to relying on the furnace's baseline warmth, the same way you would be regardless of whether you own a Kotatsu at all. This isn't a system that eliminates the need for background heat. It's a system that reduces how high that background heat needs to run during the specific hours you're sitting still in one place. This is also where it's worth bringing back a detail from an earlier video on this channel, because it strengthens the same underlying idea rather than standing apart from it. Individual ductless mini-split air conditioning and heating units, common throughout Japanese homes, apply this exact same zone-based logic at a slightly larger scale, letting a single occupied room run warm while the rest of the house stays at a lower baseline, independently adjustable room by room, rather than one thermostat governing the entire structure. A Kotatsu is the cheapest, most extreme version of that same idea, heating a person rather than even a full room, while a mini-split is the version that heats a whole room efficiently without touching the rest of the house. Different budgets, different scopes, same underlying philosophy. Match the heat to where people actually are, not to the entire structure uniformly. Now, the honest limits, stated as plainly as we've stated them on every build on this channel. A Kotatsu will not keep your pipes from freezing in a genuinely cold climate if you turn your furnace off entirely. The background heat a furnace provides is doing real structural work that a Kotatsu was never designed to replace. And turning your heat off completely to save money is a false economy that risks a repair bill far larger than anything you'd save on a winter's heating costs. It also won't keep a bathroom, a kitchen while you're cooking and moving around, or a bedroom while you're getting dressed comfortably warm, since those are all rooms where you're moving rather than sitting still for an extended period. And a Kotatsu's entire design assumes you're staying in one place. If your household genuinely needs multiple rooms warm simultaneously for different family members doing different things, a single Kotatsu in the living room doesn't solve that need on its own, and you're back to leaning more heavily on whole house heating or looking at a mini-split style solution for the specific rooms that need independent, extended warmth. It's also worth being honest about climate. This approach works best in homes with genuinely cold, but not brutally sub-zero winters, and in households where family members do spend real stretches of time sitting still together in a shared space. which describes a huge share of typical winter evenings for a huge share of households, but isn't universal. If your winters regularly drop well below zero for extended stretches, a Kotatsu remains a genuinely useful supplement, but the share of your total heating cost it can realistically offset shrinks, since the furnace's baseline workload in that kind of climate is doing more essential, non-optional work regardless of how you're supplementing it. There's a broader point worth closing on, because it connects this video to nearly everything else on this channel. The dramatic price comparison in today's title, $120 against $4,000, was never really a fair, literal matchup, and pretending otherwise would be exactly the kind of dishonesty we don't do here. What's actually true, and worth far more than a dramatic number, is that a huge share of what a furnace spends all winter heating is air nobody's using, and $120 spent correctly, on the right device, used consistently, genuinely claws back a meaningful piece of that waste without asking you to sacrifice comfort to do it. That's not a replacement for a furnace. It's the same principle that's run through every build on this channel. Match the tool to the actual job, rather than assuming bigger and more expensive is automatically the only real solution. And in the specific case of a cold evening spent sitting still in one room, the job was never actually heat the whole house to begin with. It was just keep this one person warm, and Japan figured out how to do exactly that job, for pennies, centuries, before anyone thought to measure it. Before you go, tell me in the comments what your actual monthly heating bill runs during the coldest part of your winter, and whether a setup like this would realistically fit how your household actually spends its evenings. If you've already got a Kotatsu or something similar, share how you're actually using it alongside your regular heating. I read every comment, and those real household routines are usually exactly what shapes the next build on this channel.